Why does every map of Mireth show the same lantern burning in a different place?
Mireth held 30,000 souls before the collapse of the Seventh Compact 2 centuries ago. At its height, it ran 4 functioning aqueducts, a grain reserve sufficient for 3 years of siege, and the largest cartographic library in the Eastern Territories. Now it's rubble, swallowed by the Ashwood Forest, visited only by cartographers, relic hunters, and the desperately lost. At the center of those ruins hangs one iron lantern. It's burned continuously for 214 years. No oil reservoir, no wick replacement, no recorded fuel source of any kind in the archivist's ledgers. The archivist's collection holds 11 independent surveys of Mireth, commissioned between the Year of Ash and the present decade. Every cartographer found the lantern. Not one found it in the same place. The cartographer Seville Dorn, surveying Mireth in year 187 of the Compact's reckoning, noted in his field journal that he'd triangulated the lantern's position 3 separate times in one morning. Each reading contradicted the last. The Grand Archive of Vaeltharion classified the lantern as an unresolved phenomenon in year 1933. That classification is the bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. It means, we noticed, we filed it, we moved on. The lantern shares a shelf category with 17 other open cases, including an unmapped river in the Thornwood Basin that reverses its flow every 3rd winter and has done so for at least 60 years. The archive's indifference is a problem, because to understand why the lantern moves, you have to go back to the night Mireth died. Not the slow death of neglect, the specific, violent night the city broke. In the Year of Ash, the Compact's enforcers sealed Mireth's gates from the outside. The official decree survives in fragments. It cites civic contagion, a phrase that, in Compact legal language, meant political dissent they couldn't afford to let spread. 30,000 people were sealed inside. The Compact's enforcers didn't return. Mireth's inhabitants were left without resupply, without medicine, without any formal acknowledgement that they'd been abandoned to die. The city's own grain ledgers, recovered in year 204, show rationing began within 11 days of the sealing. Among those 30,000 was a family called the Vael Mireth, the city's founding bloodline. A single water-damaged genealogical register in the archive names them. It lists 41 family members at the time of the sealing. By the end of the first winter, 37 of those names had been crossed out. One name survives uncrossed into the second winter. Arabelle Vael Mireth. The register identifies her as a keeper of the family's hearth fire. Not a mage, not a scholar, a woman who kept a fire burning because that was her function. The Vael Mireth hearth hall still stands, barely. 4 walls, a collapsed roof, a stone fire pit at its center cold for 2 centuries. Aravelle's last recorded act, according to a fragment of the city's final ledger, was lighting an iron lantern. That same ledger records no further entry after her name. The city's administrative record simply stops. Here is where the mystery stops being a cartographer's puzzle and becomes something harder. What kind of vow survives the death of the person who made it? What kind of grief is fierce enough to outlast the body that carried it? In year 2111, a secondary ledger fragment was recovered from beneath the hearth hall's collapsed floor. It's the only document in Aravelle's own hand. The archivist has dated it to the final month before Mireth's records go silent entirely. The fragment contains no spell formula, no ritual instruction. It's a declaration written in the plain domestic language of a hearthkeeper. Arabelle states, without flourish, that the lantern will follow her bloodline, that it will stay within sight of her descendants, that they will never again be left in darkness. The lantern is not in one place. It never was. It's been moving across Vaeltharion for 214 years, staying within sight of whichever living descendant of Arabelle Vael Mireth is nearest. The cartographers weren't making errors. They were each finding it in a genuinely different location. The archivist cross-referenced every recorded lantern position against the genealogical register of surviving Vaeltharion descendants. The correlation is exact. In year 187, when Seville Dorn found the lantern shifting across his triangulation points, a descendant named Corvel Vale was walking through Mireth that same morning. This isn't magic in the way Vaeltharion scholars define it. No invocation, no reagent, no trained practitioner. The archivist's classification for this type of phenomenon is a bound will, an intention so total that it restructures the world around its object of protection. The archive records only 3 confirmed bound wills across Vaeltharion's entire documented history. All 3 originate in moments of catastrophic loss. All 3 are protective in nature. None were made by mages. All 3 were made by ordinary people at the absolute limit of grief. But here's where it gets harder. A lantern that follows you is also a lantern that marks you. For 2 centuries, the Mireth descendants have carried a light that can't be extinguished and can't be hidden. Protection and exposure are the same object. The archive's year 198 field notes record that a compact enforcement officer tracking a descendant named Pale Vale through the Ashwood reported locating his quarry by following an unexplained light source through the forest at night. He didn't know what it was. He used it anyway. The genealogical register notes that in year 156, a descendant named Fessa Vale attempted to extinguish the lantern. She covered it, submerged it in a river, and finally struck it with a hammer. The flame was unaffected. The iron dented. The light didn't change. Aravel didn't make a wish. She made a decision. The distinction matters enormously. A wish asks the world to change. A decision changes the one who makes it so completely that the world has no choice but to respond. The archivist's year 211 structural survey of the Hearth Hall found something that supports this. The stone floor directly beneath where the lantern first hung has fused into a single seamless surface, every crack sealed, as though the material itself reorganized in response to the vow being made. Grief at sufficient depth becomes structural, and the archive now has the stonework to prove it. The archive holds 2 parallel cases. In year 44, a dock worker named Sovan Thresh lost his entire family to a collapsed harbor warehouse and spent the next 30 years personally funding and building a new inspection system for every load-bearing structure in the port of Caldenmere, a system still in use today. In year 91, a woman named Yrith of the Thornwood lost her village to a preventable flood and walked to the capital alone to demand construction of the Thornwood levees, which she lived to see completed. Neither had institutional power. Both changed the physical world. Grief doesn't always collapse inward. Sometimes it builds outward. The current Vaeltharion descendants number 11, according to the archive's most recent genealogical survey. Most don't know what they are. Some have noticed that a lantern seems to appear near them in dark places. They haven't yet connected the pattern. A merchant named Orvin Vale, writing to his sister in year 209, described finding a burning lantern in an abandoned warehouse where he'd taken shelter during a storm. He called it fortunate. He didn't call it impossible. He didn't know to. The archive's working theory holds that bound wills aren't anomalies. They're the most honest expression of how power actually functions in Vaeltharion. The evidence is specific. All 3 confirmed bound wills have outlasted the institutions that caused the original harm. The 7th compact dissolved in year 201. Its enforcement apparatus no longer exists. The lantern Aravel lit in defiance of that apparatus is still burning. The compact filed no unresolved phenomenon report on its own collapse. Which raises a question the archive hasn't answered. What happens when the last Mireth descendant dies? Does the lantern go dark for the first time in 2 centuries? Does it stay lit in the ruins of Mireth, waiting for a bloodline that no longer exists? Does Aravel's will simply end? The Archive's most recent field survey, conducted in year 213, recorded one detail none of the previous 11 surveys noted. The lantern's flame is brighter now than in the earliest descriptions. 2 centuries of burning without fuel, and it's growing stronger. The archivist's speculation, flagged clearly as unverified, is that the vow accumulates. Each generation of descendants who carry the lantern's protection adds to the weight of the original intention. Aravel didn't just make a promise, she started something that the living continue to sustain without knowing it. Here is what the archive hasn't yet published, but can't avoid. If the flame grows stronger with each generation, then bound wills aren't fixed events. They're living processes, which means the question is no longer only what Aravel did 2 centuries ago. The question becomes whether a bound will can be made deliberately, by someone who understands the mechanism, rather than stumbled into at the limit of grief. The archive has opened a restricted inquiry. It hasn't announced who is funding it. The inquiry has already produced one result the archive didn't expect. In year 214, this year, a field agent in the port city of Caldenmere filed a report describing an iron lantern burning without fuel in an abandoned building. The building has no connection to Mireth. The genealogical survey finds no Vale Mireth descendants within 40 miles. The archive has sent a cartographer. The cartographer has found the lantern in 3 different locations on 3 consecutive mornings. The lantern of Mireth's end is still burning tonight. And now, apparently, so is another one. The archive's working assumption that bound wills are rare accidents of catastrophic grief may already be wrong, which means the more useful question isn't what Aravel Vale Mireth did 2 centuries ago. It's this: what intentions made at the limit of ordinary human grief are already restructuring the world around you without anyone having filed the paperwork yet?